Chanko, you can start anytime. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'll start over. Welcome to the colloquium of the C3 Digital Transformation Institute. You're in for a special treat this afternoon. Before I introduce the speaker, let me just tell you a little bit about the Institute. Camille, next slide, please. So the Institute is, I'm not going to repeat what I said, but I'm going to tell you what Moshe, our speaker, said. He said, information technology has become the operating system of societal systems, and really it's the mission of DTI is to advance how that really transforms business, government, and society. It's a partnership of, it's funded by C3.ai and Microsoft, a few industrial partners as well. And it's a partnership, the lead partners are Berkeley and Illinois, and Carnegie Mellon, MIT, Princeton, and Princeton, Chicago, University of Stanford University, then NCSA, which is the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at Illinois, and Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. Of course, it's quite open. We have partnerships, including with Rice, where Moshe is from, and other schools, University of Pennsylvania, and I was neglected to say University of Chicago as one of the lead partners. So this colloquium, the first set of speeches here will be really about what we can do broadly for the pandemic. Next week, we have Asu Ozdaglar from MIT. She'll talk, it's really about reopening and the economics of reopening in networked epidemic systems. Zoe Rapti is a applied mathematician. She's going to talk about spread of COVID-19. Vince Poor is also going to be talking about modeling. He was highlighted in a Spectrum article last week. Sarah Bamin, also from MIT, is going to talk about reopening transportation systems and privacy issues and contact tracing beyond cryptographic protocols. He will talk about leaked information and so on. San Mikoyeho will talk about distributed data storage and encryption for that. That's on September 24th. Moving along, thank you. Rahim Khani will talk about fairness in AI from Carnegie Mellon. Senthil Mulainathan and Ziad Obermeyer will talk about really screening for triage using AI techniques. Hebron Seder will talk about his NLP hub for COVID-19. His fame is in doing something called the Materials Genome Project, which is a hub for materials. He's at Lawrence Berkeley Labs. Jennifer Listgarten will talk about bioinformatics and machine learning-based design of proteins and small molecules. Emmanuel Candes from Stanford will talk about really about causation versus correlation. He's got a wonderful title, which I'll let you read, but it's really about how do you get a causation and this counterfactual predictions. And that's also wonderful. Ziv Bar-Joseph from Carnegie Mellon with a bigger gang around him, including MIT and so on. We'll talk about what exciting project on new treatments. René Vidal from Hopkins will talk about, mathematics of deep learning. That's really what that is. And it's more vanilla titles up here. Nancy Amato from University of Illinois will talk about, that's a partnership with Rice on mining diagnostic sequences for SARS-CoV-2. And Stefania Parasco and Corina Tarnita will talk about architecting. They're both architects. They'll talk about what to do. And finally, Karen Chappell is going to talk about something that's on the minds of everybody nowadays. It's about housing and evictions and all of that. And she had predicted this to be a big issue already in May. Okay, next slide, please. The format of this meeting is, about 40 minutes, maybe give or take, and there'll be time for Q&A. Camille will be active. She's on the Q&A feature to ask questions. You can upload questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. We'll try to compress questions as needed. Okay, I'm moving along, so let's be sure to give him. Today's talk is titled efficiency versus resilience, lessons from COVID-19. And let me just say a few words about Moshe. Moshe is one of the most distinguished computer scientists I know, and one of the most distinguished computer scientists, period. Let me just highlight a few things. He's certainly a Karen Ostrom George Distinguished Professor at Rice. But he is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, American Math Society, the European Association for AAAI, IEEE, and SIAM, and certainly a member of the National Academy of Engineering and Science, and the European Academy of Sciences. But in addition to all of these, I've always known him to be the one that certainly pretty much runs the computer science section of the National Academy of Engineers, and he is really, I've enjoyed working for him in that capacity. He's a senior editor of the communications of the ACM, but really, to this day, he's still known as the editor-in-chief for longstanding editor-in-chief of the CACM. So I'm remiss in repeating his many awards, ACM Sigma, his Pascal Medal, Good Award of the IEEE Computer Society, and the Church Award of SIGLOG. So anyhow, his work on formal methods, finite model theory is just really foundational, and I've enjoyed teaching what he's done. And so without further ado, let me turn you over to Moshe. Please, Moshe, a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much. And I will mute myself.
Okay. Good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we are in business. I don't think it's an exaggeration for us to say that COVID-19 is the defining event of our lifetime. I mean, this is an event on a scale of a world war, There was a generation that people call a great generation, the generation that fought World War II. COVID-19 is our world war. And whenever event of that scale happens, an epochal event, we will be talking about the time before and the time after. An event like that, I think we ought to kind of step back of ourselves and say, okay, do we get some new insights in a very big way? And my big insight that I got so far, it's not over yet, maybe I'll have more big insights, but so far the big insight is the issue of the dichotomy between efficiency and resilience. And this is what I want to talk about today. So we are living today in a quintuple crisis. Of course, what's driving it is the public health crisis. And probably many of us are obsessive every day. We look at this dashboard and we see how many new cases and how many dead in the world, in the US. And you see this is just a couple of months and it's already woefully out of date. By now we have more than 5 million cases and close to 175,000 dead. So this is public health crisis number one. The crisis number one. The second crisis is an economic crisis. So you look at this picture and you think maybe this is the parking lot at Disneyland. No, these are people who are in a line for food bank. They need food. So we have people waiting for hours in this kind of interminable lines just to get food. And this relates to, in fact, to one of the things you mentioned, precarity, Shankar, and I'll come back to precarity. Then we have an energy crisis. And we think, okay, maybe energy crisis is about the cost of oil and gas. But if the cost of oil and gas goes way down, what happened to green energy? So it's not just, so it really is, oil, gas prices low is not necessarily a good thing for us if we want to think about in terms of green energy. Then we have a social crisis. We discovered there are deep inequities in American society, and now we're trying to deal with them. And now here we are seeing the protests in Lafayette Square. And finally, we have a leadership crisis. I don't need to say much more about it. but we all understand we are now in a political inflection point that will, again, there will be the epoch before and the epoch after. So a few months ago, March looks like a long time ago, but in March there was a phrase that became popular, and it was called flattening the curve. And the idea is that when we have an epidemic, the cases go up and up and up, and at some point it starts to go down. But we want to have a flatter curve. Now, why was it so important to get a flatter curve? The reason is, and the rationale was, yes, we have lots of infection, but if they all happen at the same time, we can't handle all at the same time. The hospitals are not ready to suddenly have such massive cases of infection. This is from New England Journal of Medicine in April of this year. Again, it seemed like a long time ago, but you may remember the issues were shortage of ventilators, shortage of PPE. We were not ready. And so the idea was, let's flatten the curve so we can manage this wave of infection and be able to survive it and not deal with not having critical shortages. And in March of this year, William Galston, who is an economist at the Brookings Institute, wrote a column that really caught my eye. And the column was, efficiency is not the only economic virtue. And he puts really very fundamental question. What if the relentless pursuit of efficiency, which has dominated American business thinking for decades, has made the global economic system more vulnerable to shocks? And he points out that efficiency means that you are supremely adapted to the environment, so there's no waste. But if you are so well adapted, it's very difficult for you to change. So efficiency is about optimal adaptation, and resilience is about ability to adapt to change. And so resilience is the ability to recover from illness, depression, adversity, and the like. And what Galston is saying, we've been focused on so much of efficiency and we neglected resilience. And this is the theme, this tension between efficiency and resilience is what I want to pursue for the next of this talk. And people are actually making the same point in a different way. So in May of this year, Thomas Friedman, remember, the prophet of globalization, writes a column. Greed and globalization set up us for disaster. Over the past 20 years, we've been steadily removing man-made and natural buffer, redundancy, regulation, and norms that provide resilience and protection when big system, be they ecological, geopolitical, or financial, get stressed. We've been recklessly removing these buffers out of an obsession with short-term efficiency and growth, or without thinking at all. So Tom Friedman, who was the prophet of globalization, suddenly says, wow, we've created a world which is very efficient, but not very resilient. And it turns out that this is an old point. And when I start giving talks, somebody said, oh, you should find this paper. And I found a paper from 1975 on the inefficiency of being efficient. And this was from a journal that I never heard about, Environment and Planning. But again, Goldberg is making the point that the narrow focus on efficiency, meaning you're not considering other aspects of decision-making. And he writes, another facet of decision-making is the narrowness with which problems are defined and the equally narrow range of alternatives sought for solutions. So already in 75, Goldberg pointed out that being too efficient is actually not very efficient in the long term. And I'll get back to this issue of short term and long term. But let me bring another example that I'm sure you're all familiar with, but I want to look at it now from the perspective of efficiency and resilience. So just-in-time manufacturing. This, I remember when this became a big deal. People suddenly came, I think it was in the 80s or 90s, a new idea, having a stock of parts, having inventory is actually very inefficient. You pay money to buy the parts, they sit idle, that means your money is not active, you need to maintain it, you need space. All of this is very expensive. If you can manage your supply system so the parts arrive just in time when they're needed on the line, you save all the cost of inventory. So let's do away from inventory. for example, Dell became famous as a company that was not so much as innovative in technology, but innovating in being incredibly efficient, in particular using just-in-time manufacturing. Now, just-in-time manufacturing assume best-case scenario, because assume that everything will happen just as you foresaw it. And so you're very efficient, but you have no resilience, because if suddenly the parts are delayed, your line stops. And so if you have a just-in-time hospital, you don't maintain a big inventory of PPEs. When we need PPEs, we'll order from China, they'll be here in 3 weeks, and that's good enough. Well, not when you have an epidemic or pandemic. 3 weeks is too long to wait, and maybe you cannot even get them from China. So that's how we got into a crisis early in the pandemic with PPE, ventilator, and the like. Let's look at it. Let me bring another example from finance. So in finance, there is something called VAR, value at risk, which is a measure, what is my risk? I want to know with probability, let's say 99%, I want to know that I'm not going to lose more than let's say $10 million. So I'll make sure that I can survive a loss of $10 million. And I know that with certain probability, I will not lose more than that. And that's called value at risk. And people design a whole theory, and this is called the Gaussian copula function. Of course, we can spend the next hour just trying to understand this beautiful formula, but we won't. But this formula was later, in the financial crisis of 2008, this formula became known as the formula that killed Wall Street. Because while it gave estimates during normal time, during the crisis, it did not give estimates, because it did not tell you what will happen in the black swan event of the 1%. Remember, in 99%, you're only losing $10 million, and you know you can survive it. What happened in the 1%? The formula did not predict what will happen in the 1%, and that's, so even companies that did risk analysis and hedging, like Lehman Brothers, found themselves going bankrupt because the formula was not resilient enough. Even if we go to not just in economic, even if we go to like governance. So we like in the West, we like democracy. How good is democracy? Winston Churchill in 1947 told us, well, democracy is not that great. We have tried many different systems. No one pretended democracy is perfect or all wise. Indeed, it has been said democracy is the worst form of governance, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. So this is a cliche. Democracy is the worst system, except for everything else. Democracy is highly inefficient. We know it. I mean, you have different branches of government. They have to negotiate with each other. Parties, election, very, very inefficient. Generally speaking, it is more resilient, because in a country where you have authoritarian regime, one person makes a bad decision and the whole country suffers. It turns out, on the other hand, in the middle of a pandemic, maybe we have too much democracy, when every state does what it wants, when every county can do what it wants, when every university can do what it wants, we don't have a societal response to pandemic. So this issue of resilience is also an issue, big issue in governance. And I saw that one of your talk will be on housing precarity, but we have built a society where precarity is built in. This is from a study, in 2 studies from 2016. The first one, this article in the Atlantic, the secret shame of middle class American. Nearly half of Americans, I think 47%, could not cope with an unexpected expense of $400. $400. That means like your brake went bad. Nearly half of the population cannot cope with it. 2/3 of the population cannot cope with a sudden expense of $1,000. Your transmission went bad. So we had a society where 2/3 of the population were living on the edge, and then were hit by a pandemic. So you saw these food lines. And Adam Serwer in the Atlantic of this year in June wrote, the article was titled, "It did not have to be like that." And he wrote, "The desperation of US workers in the aftermath of the coronavirus was the product of a series of policy decisions and missed opportunities." And we are not done. As you pointed out, the housing crisis, is still waiting to fully unfold. We don't know how we come out of it. The issue came up. Now I want to talk a little about the computer science, look at it from the perspective of, from the lens of computer science. So in 2016, CACM published an article called Sex as an Algorithm. And he looked at sexual reproduction from evolutionary point of view from the lens of computation. We had such a nice title. We had a bit of a challenge how to depict, what to put on the cover page. So we had lots of discussion, and then we decided to make it just pink. And we thought it was just a bit humor, but it turned out some people got very, very offended. I had to fall on my sword and apologize for making a pink cover. But this was actually a very serious article. The article was by Adi Livnat and Christopher Dimitriou. I think he was at Berkeley, still at Berkeley at the time when he wrote it. And they were looking at sexual reproduction, which correspond to genetic algorithms. And they says, wait a minute, if you're in the era of optimization, then simulated annealing, which is just a sequence of mutations, is considered to be a better algorithm than genetic algorithms. So genetic algorithm has sexual reproduction. Simulated annealing only has asexual evolution, just mutation. And if you are an optimization researcher, you say, no, simulated annealing is better than genetic algorithm. So why does nature choose sexual reproduction as almost the exclusive reproduction mechanism in animals? Bacteria use typically mutations, but animals, higher animals use sex. Why is that? What is the answer to that? And I came up with a beautiful answer. And the answer is that indeed, if you just want to optimize, you should use simulated annealing, which means just mutations. But what sex does, it produces a greater diversity of the genotype. So we have greater population diversity. Now, why is that important? Because if you don't have this diversity and the population is all very well adapted to the environment, there is disruptive environmental change, and the whole species disappear, become extinct. On the other hand, if you have diversity in the population, some member of the species will survive, even though they will survive because they were not perfectly fit, they will survive, and the species will survive. So sex gives us resilience. Okay, so nature went for resilience. Now, in some sense, both efficiency and resilience, you can think of them as two forms of optimization. But efficiency is for short-term optimization, and resilience is for long-term optimization. What does nature care about more, long-term or short-term? The answer is that when we look at who survived, it's all about long-term optimization, long-term survival. So the T-Rex was incredibly efficient predator, but was not very resilient. So we don't have T-Rexes anymore other than in museums. So if you care about survival, and I think that should be, first of all, we should care about survival, then resilience should dominate efficiency. Now let's go more into computer science. So I was trained on the first book on algorithms that I read was The Art of Computer Programming. And in fact, Don Knuth introduced the term analysis of algorithm. So if you go to Wikipedia, it defines analysis of algorithm is the process of finding the computational complexity of algorithm, the amount of time, storage, and other resources needed to execute them. It's all about efficiency. Look at Knuth's book. It's all about efficiency. Look at other algorithms books. It's all about efficiency. So take sorting. So we have bubble sort, which is quadratic in the worst case and the average case. And then you have merge sort, which is in the worst case n log n. And then you have quick sort, which is considered a good algorithm because it's on the average case is n log n, but in the worst case it can be n squared. So in an article in CSM in 2013, David Ackley asked about robustness. He did not use the term resilience, he asked about robustness. And he asked what happened if the comparison operation in 10% can give you a wrong answer. So he introduced a model where you do sorting, and randomly you choose every 1/10 of 10% of the comparison operator, and then you get a random answer rather than the correct answer. And then the question is the final sorted list with errors, how close it is to being fully sorted. And there is a measure there how to define the distance between a fully sorted list and a not fully sorted list. So it turns out that bubble sort is very robust, while merge sort and quicksort are not. And you wonder, why is that? Well, the answer is because bubble sort is inefficient. It has made many more comparisons. So even if it made some mistakes, it will self-correct. So having redundancy will give us resilience. And I'll come back to this point. Redundancy gives you resilience. So this is something that does not normally come up in an algorithm course. Nobody talks about the robustness of algorithms. So this is in sorting. Let me go to a more kind of current example. So one of the largest corporation is a Alphabet, and the main business is search, and that's Google. Google still is the biggest company in the Alphabet portfolio. And Google came about because Larry Page came up with an amazing algorithm, what we call PageRank. So if you may remember from the very early days when we had internet search, the order of the result was pretty crappy. That means that you search for something and you have to go page after page after page to look for irrelevant results. And when the Google search engine was published, it was amazing. The thing you want will be at the very, very top. And the idea was a beautiful idea. Let's look at the underlying network of links of one URL pointing, one website pointing through URL to another website. And the more website point to you, you must be more important. And the more important websites point to you, the more important even more than you become. And now you can define a beautiful mathematical theory. There's eigenvalue and random walks, and you get a very nice algorithm. The problem is that very quickly people realize how they can game the algorithm. By creating fake links, they can make a website go up in the search, and there became a whole business of search engine optimization. And PageRank is not resilience. In fact, when I was editor-in-chief of CSM, I went to my friends in Google. I said, search quality is a very important topic. Could you write an article about search quality? I apologize for the phone ringing. So they said, oh, we'd love to write an article. And then they came back a week later, said, no, we cannot write an article. It's a trade secret. We cannot explain anymore. As soon as we write how we rank search, people learn to game the system. So in fact, the way they gave you now, and now it's a cat and mouse game between search engine optimization and the algorithm, and therefore the algorithm is a trade secret. Let me give you another example. You probably heard the term pack learning. But before Vardi introduced pack learning, Stockmyer introduced the concept of pack computing, probably approximately correct. So you have an algorithm that computes a function, randomized algorithm, and it computes a function approximately. And what you want is to be with high confidence, with high probability, you want to have low error. So you have two parameters, which is epsilon is the error, and you have delta in a confidence, and you want to get to be within factor 1 plus epsilon above and below with probability 1 minus delta. My apology, this is the problem with home office. So, but there is a gap in Stockmyer's definition. What happened in the tail event? What happens in probability 1 minus delta? How off can you be? And the answer is, pack definition does not say how off can you be. So in fact, in 2016, Chakraborty, Millen, and myself, we defined this concept of strong pack, where also we want the expectation of the computation to be correct. And it means we want to be resilient. Even in the tail, we don't want the tail event to affect us too much, remember the formula value at risk, it was the tail events, the black swan events that kill Wall Street. We want to make sure that even in tail events cannot be too bad. That's resilience. So I just want to give you some example where you can take the concept of resilience and bring it into the analysis of algorithm. And I think we need to do that. But I want to look at this from a slightly broader lens. And I want to talk about friction in computing. And in 2013, I wrote a column about this. And I said, we're addicted to removing friction. Our discipline is dedicated to reducing friction. Latency must be eliminated. Bandwidth must increase. Ubiquity should be universal. We just want to reduce friction completely. Mark Zuckerberg, early on, what's the purpose of Facebook? Frictionless sharing. Sharing should be made as easy as possible, no friction. Now today we understand that the utopia, in quotes, of frictionless sharing, it leads to filter bubble, fake news, extreme content, and all kinds of social ills. It was not good to have no friction whatsoever. And I'll show you other examples. 10 years ago, in 2010, there was something called the flash crash. The Dow Jones crashed 600 points in 5 minutes. They had to stop trading because it was going to keep falling. Eventually, it was identified there was a bug in high-frequency trading. Now, high-frequency trading goes back to the 2000s, when people realized that when humans give the order, the buy and sell order, it's too slow. So today, this is also called algorithmic trading. And the idea is, let's reduce the latency as much as possible. Let's go to microseconds. And if I beat you by 1 microsecond, I will win the trade. And so what you get is a system that is very non-resilient because there is no delay. If you know, system without delays are very non-robust. Now, what is the purpose? The people who do it tell you the market is more liquid. But even people that form the field say, no, it's just about the money. Does not really make the market more liquid. It has no social value. And it's really a shame that the SEC does not choose to regulate it and focus not just on efficiency, but also on resilience, how to make sure that the market cannot crash because of algorithmic trading. And let me go take this concept of friction. Let me go to human affairs. So a column in Washington Post a couple of years ago, Jenna Birch asked, why is it so hard to turn a Tinder date into a relationship? So in Tinder, which I've read about it, I'm a theoretician, I've never used it, but I'm told you sweep left and you sweep right. If you like or you don't like or you like. And Jenna writes, despite the swarms of matches over the years, I've never had an update turn into actual relationship. Now, of course, her sample was anecdotal, but there were studies that really showed that if you meet online, the likelihood of the relationship surviving for more than 1 year are significantly lower. Now, why is that? The answer is there is an old song, easy comes, easy go. Because friction is lower, everybody understands there was less investment in it. So if it doesn't work, oh well, easy come, easy goes. So having things too easy is not good. So if we go to our colleagues in mechanical engineering and ask them whether the goal is to eliminate all friction, they will say, you're crazy. I need to think about friction in a holistic way. I want it at the tire, I don't want it on a drive shaft. So Aristotle said that getting angry is easy, but getting angry for the right reason, at the right person, at the right time, in the right place, at the right amount, this is hard. And so we need friction in the world, but we need it at the right amount, in the right place, at the right time. And this is something that computer science did not study at all. When should we have friction? When is friction useful? Where, when, and to what extent? And I think we need to welcome back friction into computing and study it as a fundamental concept in computing. Now let's talk about security, which of course, I think, again, is an aspect of resilience. Do we have cybersecurity? Here is a verbatim email from a colleague of mine who is a very respected security researcher. And he once sent me email to explain to me how security works. First, somebody builds a thing and it's super useful. Eventually somebody comes along, finds a vulnerability. Then security becomes part of the engineering process. And then over time, finally, after a few years, finally you get enough security. So security is last. You never build with security. You build first functionality and finally security. And I think Zoom was a perfect example. Security is an added on, and we still have problem with security. I heard people who in the spring got in teaching a class got Zoom bombed, and it was incredibly disturbing. So somehow we have not yet been able to build system where we start with security, we start with resilience first. So think about it. The computer age is about 75 years. Turing Awards, 3 Turing Awards in cryptography, 3 Turing Awards in cryptography. Is there a Turing Award in cybersecurity? No, because you cannot think who has done something so important in security that deserves the Turing Award. So we still do not have secure information system. This is the reality. But now it's not just about somebody will maybe get will have my privacy, but there is a risk of power system, water system. As we said, we are the operating system of society, and somehow we are not panicking that we created a very unsecure infrastructure. And to me, this is a colossal failure of our community. The fact that we are not just, we don't have cybersecurity, but we just treat it as, oh, this is business as usual. But there is an ideology behind it. I don't think it's just an accident. I would call the ideology cyber libertarianism. And I want to contrast security, computing security, to transportation. The Ford Model T rolled off the manufacturing line in 1910. And for the last 100 years, we were trying to make cars safer and safer and safer. And we've been very successful because it took it very, very seriously. We have the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. We don't have any such body for computer security. There is many, many bodies. I mean, NSA is part of it, NIST is part of it. And underlying this, when you tell people maybe we need to regulate security, people say, no, don't regulate. Regulation will stifle innovation. But the reality is that we have not been able to fix it on our own. Maybe it is time to get government involved and forcing tech community, the tech industry, to really do a better job on security. Now I want to switch from the issues of computing to economic efficiency. So we had a relentless pursuit of efficiency, and we did not get ready for the pandemic properly. So take, for example, Trump cut the budget for the CDC, and the argument was we can always hire doctors when we need them. But now we know when you need the doctors, it's just too late. So again, you know, if you focus on efficiency, you build a system that is not resilient. So let's talk a little more in depth about economic efficiency. So I went to study the terms. I went to a special Wikipedia for economics. It's called Investopedia. And they define economic efficiency. Goods and factor of production are distributed or allocated to their most valuable use, and waste is minimized. This is economic efficiency. And free market advocates believe that through individual self-interest and freedom of production, we will get efficiency. So this individual self-interest will lead us to efficiency. And again, I'm quoting from Investopedia, the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. And so now we should ask ourselves, is it really the case that efficiency guarantees optimality? Does efficiency guarantee optimality? So economists do study the concept of efficiency, and the fundamental, very, very fundamental theorem in economic theory is called the first welfare theorem. And the first welfare theorem basically said that under certain assumption, the market will converge into a competitive Pareto optimal efficiency, equilibrium. And that is economics say this is efficiency. The fact that we are in a competitive Pareto optimal equilibrium, this is economic efficiency. So now we can ask a very specific question. Does having such competitive Pareto optimal equilibrium, which is efficient, does it serve the best interest of society? And interestingly, we go back to Papadimitriou. And Papadimitriou, together with Koutsoupias' study, is something they call the price of anarchy. So they look at Nash equilibrium, they look at the worst possible Nash equilibrium, and they want to compare it to the social optimum. And this ratio they call the price of anarchy. And they were inspired by approximation algorithm. They look at what is the best you can do, what is the worst you can do. And what they show is the price of anarchy can be arbitrarily high, depending on the complexity of the system. So you take this is a technical result. They were inspired by computer science. They look at economic theory. And the conclusion was economic efficiency does not guarantee the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. You can have efficiency, but you don't have optimality at all. And a few years later, Papadimitriou looked at the question, how long does it take to reach equilibrium? So the way we reach equilibrium is by a sequence of individual actions. I decide to raise the price, you decide to raise the demand, and one action, eventually we reach equilibrium. But the Skalakis called Papadimitriou look at it the search problem. And what the show is, because you need a sequence of local actions, it can take exponentially long to reach equilibrium. So it will take a very long time to reach equilibrium because the markets operate essentially as a local search algorithm. And that means the market is never likely to be in equilibrium. Why? Because when it takes so long, circumstances will change. Price will go up, supply will go up, demand will go down. There will never be an equilibrium. So equilibrium, which is a very fundamental concept in economics, is a mythical creature. It's very efficient to be in a Pareto optimal equilibrium, but you have no optimality when you reach such equilibrium, and in fact, you never reach it. So it's not a realistic result. It doesn't tell us that, I'm not trying to say the markets are bad, but we should take away the mythology of markets. They do not give us this beautiful equilibrium. It just doesn't happen in reality. And this is something that economists, serious economists also agree. And that means that some of the mythology of Wall Street, so there is a movie, classical movie, 1987 called Wall Street, and Michael Douglas is playing Gordon Gekko, and he gave this fiery speech where he said, greed, for the lack of better word, is good because it's by everybody acting greedily, we get Adam Smith's invisible hand. But we all know that a greedy algorithm gets stuck in a local optima. So the invisible hand doesn't work by itself. It can get stuck in local optima, and we need to get out. We need some systemic intervention to drive the market out of such an optima. My assertion is when it comes to cybersecurity now, the market has failed us. Whatever reason we can analyze, the market does not push the system towards better cybersecurity. That means we need systemic intervention, and I don't know how to do it short of some kind of a government action. And in fact, again, some of I'm saying this is what was known in economics itself. So there is a concept called in economic homo economicus, and this described agent as supremely rational, narrowly self-interested, just always maximizing their utility. Now, behavioral economics already told us that people are irrational. Kahneman and Tversky et al., we know today about all these cognitive biases. But already in the 50s, Herb Simon argued against this optimality. And he said most people settle for good enough outcome. You don't try to get, not everybody's trying to make the most money they can. They just want enough income to have good life. In fact, you pursue only money, we think of you as a jerk. And in fact, one of the things that good enough does, it's more resilient. It's less efficient, but it's more resilient. So again, resiliency, something that has to be emphasized. I want to give you a technical example about resiliency. So this is it will be short, 3 slides. I will go into more technicality. So there's a concept of games, discounted games with discounted sum game with reward. You have 2 players, player 0 and player 1. They change positions on a graph game. At each state, they get a reward. But the value of the reward gets discounted as you go farther away. So there's a classical optimization problem. Find a strategy for player 0 that will maximize the reward against player 1 strategy. And Swick and Patterson came up with a polynomial time was called value iteration algorithm. Value iteration is a very, very important algorithm also in machine learning, in reinforcement learning. They showed that this problem, discounted sum game, can be solved using value iteration. Then people ask what happened if in addition to the rewards, you want to say something about the behavior, what we call temporally extended goals. For example, every message sent is eventually received. Then it was shown by Chatterjee et al. There's no optimal strategy. So we seem to be stuck. We want to optimize both rewards, but we also have a hard constraint, this temporally extended goal. What do we do? And so the answer was, there's nothing you could do. But my student, Suguman Banzal, working together with Chatterjee et al., we find what we need to do is give up an optimality. Instead, go for good enough, satisfying. Instead of saying we want the optimal reward, suppose you have a threshold. And the question now is, do you have a strategy that guarantees that your reward is above the threshold and you satisfy the temporally extended goal? And now we can do that. Now we have an algorithm to do it. So what I'm trying to demonstrate by this example, we can take resilience and inject it into many problems and give it this can become part of our research agenda. They become a technical research agenda where resilience is part of the agenda. Let me try to wrap up. We are now still, who knows, I don't even know to say we are at the end of the beginning. COVID-19 upended everything. But amazingly, here I am giving a talk and you are spread all over the United States. Because one thing did work, the internet did work through COVID-19. We're working from home, shopping from home, teaching from home, learning from home. Why did the internet work? Because it was designed to survive a nuclear war and was designed by using redundancy. So redundancy is a very important principle for redundancy gives us resilience. Error correcting codes with redundant bits to give us resilience. For Neumann, talk about reliable organism because cellular automata, cells can fail. How do you make sure you survive? The answer is redundancy. In fact, we know today that one thing happens as organism gets older, they lose some of the redundancy and they become less resilient. And we now understand that this concept works also elsewhere. Banks need to have enough capital. They need redundancy of capital to survive crisis. So resilience is a fundamental but underappreciated societal need. We in computing, but also I think economists, probably also political scientists need to focus more on resilience. We also learned that markets and individuals are actually not very good at planning for very low probability events, for black swan events. Think about it. All of you have car insurance. Why? Well, because you cannot get car registration if you don't have car insurance. Imagine that the government will drop the car insurance requirement. It will be voluntary. Well, some smart people will still say, okay, I need car insurance to protect myself. There will be many people who say, I'm a good driver. I don't need car insurance. So we have to force them to buy car insurance. We have to force them to be resilient. We have to remember COVID-19 is just the dress rehearsal for a bigger challenge that will really challenge our resilience. And it's just coming, you're in California, many of you are in California, the state is burning. Resilience, resilience, resilience. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. That was a tour de force. Let me jump in, Moshe, if I may. And Omri Moore has a question. I think that with respect to cybersecurity regulation, there's a concern that this may lead to regulation on cryptography. such as the export restrictions of the past or mandating a government backdoor?
So regulation is hard. But let me take another example. Cancer, let's suppose, God forbid you have cancer. You do chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is a poison. People that have chemotherapy tell you how terrible it is. The cure is bad. So what is medicine is very often about, and think of much in medicine, is first do no harm and navigate very carefully. How do you do more good than bad? I mean, I just was prescribed by a doctor some medication, and I start taking the medication, and after taking it for a month, I realized the side effects are better than what they're trying to address. I'm stopping it. Okay, I made my own judgment. After 1 month, I'm stopping it. So regulation is hard. Okay, what we shouldn't say, therefore, no regulation. This will be, don't do surgery because cutting people is bad. Let's figure out, I think what our problem in cybersecurity is we've resisted regulation so badly that we don't even know how to start. There's no wisdom on how to regulate smartly. And we need more people who understand technology and understand some political science and understand, this regulation is somewhere between political science and economics. There are people who specialize in this. We started teaching at RISE a course on computing, ethics, and society. And when we taught it, I have been teaching it now for 3 semesters. And one thing that happened after the first semester, one of the students came to me and says, because of the course, I've decided to change my career. Before that, I thought I'll go to Google, I'll go to Facebook, I'll go to some tech company. Now I decided to do a master's degree in tech policy. So it turns out there are some programs now coming up in tech policy. So I think it needs wisdom in policy. All the concerns you're raising are very valid concerns. I said, just like doctors need to be wise about using dangerous therapies, we need to be very careful. And regulation, there are people who are expert regulation. There are all kinds of dangerous regulation. There is something called regulatory capture, which is that you have the same people going between the regulator and the industry, and they capture the regulator because you need expertise. So you hire people from the industry for the regulator. It's not a panacea. It's going to be hard. But I think it should not, just because something is hard, we should not be a recipe for not doing it. I'm from Rice University, and we are the home place for the very famous sentence. We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, because it is hard. This is John Kennedy said it at Rice University when he announced the going to the moon program. So it's time for us to grow up and start talking seriously about regulation. It means acknowledging the challenges and the difficulties, but it doesn't mean we shy away from regulation. In fact, what happens is, if we don't do this, if we don't take it seriously, we would, Congress is already breathing at our neck, okay? If we just say, no, it would be forced upon us in a really bad way. It's better to bring together the people who understand the technology, who understand regulation, understand political science, understand the economics, and try to come up with good compromises.
All right. Love Varshni, is there always a trade-off? I think you hinted at this in your talk, but you hinted at a trade-off between efficiency and resilience, and you said 2 time scales. Efficiency so he wants more about how do you get algorithms which have 2 time scale behavior. So
companies actually struggle with it because Wall Street pushes them towards efficiency. What is the next quarter? What is going to be the next quarterly report? And they have to survive for the long term. And the answer is, we all struggle with it personally, okay? Should I eat this ice cream? Well, I really want to maintain my diet. I mean, there is a famous, I don't know where somebody who said it, God made me chaste, but not today. So we all struggle with this trade-off between doing today and doing tomorrow. In fact, if you look at it, it's in our biology, right? We have this part of the brain. And this part of the brain is what I want now. I want this food now. I want sex now. I want money now. I want. Now the forebrain is the one who can do planning. And the forebrain tells you, yeah, you'll enjoy this ice cream, but really it's bad for your diet, okay? So I think we need to start studying and to say, what's the right, formally, what is the right trade-off between efficiency? Now, in some sense, discounted sum was one attempt to do this, right? Because it says something happens very far in the future, you discount it. But what happens is if you die in the future, okay? So it's a very good question. I don't have an answer, but I think it's a subject. The trade-off between resilience and efficiency is something that must be the subject of study in a very deep way.
Good. A question from Clara. Clara Narstedt. It's how don't you think that to have digital services, to use the internet and digital services, if we hadn't had this drive for frictionless access, you think that we'd be where we are with the state of our digital service? I'm paraphrasing her question. Think of it as a defense of frictionless.
So remember, I didn't say that we should not try to reduce friction. I said that we need to be holistic about it. Where should we reduce friction? So because next week I'm going to start teaching online, and I will be teaching from home. I'm going to pay AT&T a lot of money to install fiber to my house. I'm more bandwidth, okay? So the question is, when should we do it? Imagine that it would, in fact, I'm a compulsive sharer. So I'm a very good customer of Facebook because I'm a compulsive sharer. I say, oh, this is so interesting. I must share it. Oh, this is also so interesting. And Facebook comes to me sometimes and it says, you've been sharing too much. Are you really a person? For Facebook gets suspicious of me and thinks maybe I'm a bot. Please prove to us that you are really a person because you've been sharing so much. And they block some of my sharing. So Facebook decided that they too much sharing. Vardi does too much sharing. And we need to restrict Vardi doing it. So I guess, again, many of the things that I said, I don't have formulas to give you. But we need to start thinking holistically, where do we need to have friction and where do we not? I'll give you another example. I have colleagues, I'm working with some colleagues on using computer aided learning. So now you're dealing with people who needs to learn something. So suppose they didn't get the right answer. Should you give them, no, you're wrong, here's the right answer? Probably not. They need to make some effort to learn. Probably we need to give them hints. And what kind of a hint we should give them? So here we would like to use machine learning and learn about the learning style of this person to figure out what kind of hints does this person need? Big hints? Can we reduce the hints? So if you think about it, again, it's inducing some friction, but doing it in a smart way. So the answer is not, we must have fully friction. Everything should be high friction. We must be wise about where and when and how much to use friction. So friction needs to be studied. It has not been so far, I think, a subject of study in HCI, for example, as a focus, when to introduce friction.
Great. Actually, there's a related question about giving examples for welcoming back friction in computing. I think you gave one. Let me ask you the question from Hanan Hibshi. Do you think that during working from home during the pandemic, we have practiced prioritizing resilience over efficiency, for example, by extending deadlines and moving slower, so long as we keep going? Interested to hear your thoughts. That's the question.
So, I see, for example, I read if you read like a national newspaper, I get both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and they both now have some kind of at-home section. So section focusing on people being at home. And they really, if you look at them and you see that they will have some articles about efficiency, how to do X, Y, and Z, but also they will have some articles about your psychological well-being, because we are essentially incarcerated, practically incarcerated at home now. And some of the article would say, don't worry too much about productivity. Don't be so obsessed with productivity to the point that it reduces your psychological well-being. And in fact, what's interesting was I wrote a column about this efficiency versus resilience. And a psychologist stumbled on it, and he loved it. And he wrote a blog about efficiency versus resilience from the personal psychology point of view. He said, because he said people have the same issue. People, we want people to be efficient. We all want to be productive. That's about efficiency. We have to deal with adversity. We have to bounce from adversity. This is resilience. How do we navigate these two things? So he wrote a blog about this paradigm of efficiency versus resilience from the point of, he's a therapist, he's a psychotherapist. And he found it very inspiring to have this dichotomy of efficiency versus resilience. So to me, when I saw this context, I says, oh my goodness, this is such a fundamental trade-off that we all struggle in many, many, many contexts. And it just deserves to be put on the table. And we need to take it in personal psychology, in governance, in computer science. I can think of other examples where we have navigate this trade-off.
There are a few other questions, but rather than take them, let me just sort of say one thing. Moshe, this is a fantastic talk, not only for the talk, but I think that, for instance, we are so fixated on this utility maximization, and it's so built into so many things that we do. What was so important about your talk was to say, hey, let's sit back and take notice if that's what you really want. And what you're spelling out to me is really about a philosophy of how we educate and teach. And that is just such a fantastic lesson. So I hope, what you're saying is we can actually execute a whole program to sort of build on what you're saying. So I think, it's a fantastic talk and a fantastic vision, and I think a precursor of some wonderful science. So Moshe, thank you. This has been just a wonderful talk, and thank you very much. Thank you for doing this, and thank you everybody for participating. Thank you, Moshe.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Good luck. Your center will be the perfect vehicle.
I must say, your talk is just a total eye-opener. I must confess, I'd heard earlier versions. I've seen evolutions. It's getting better and better, I have to say. It's fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay.
All right, thank you.
All of you be well. It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.